today's tutorial is on building safe and effective virtual environments. At the end of this tutorial, you will understand how using online best practices can meet students' diverse learning styles and needs, the importance of citation and acceptable use of online content, evaluation of online content tools, and finally thinking about Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge in your implementation. It's a lot to go over, so let's get started. Well, first we want to talk about how you can use web-based tools for different learning styles. So one way or option is to maybe develop a menu of options to allow the students to prove their mastery of the content. So you can set up lessons based on different learning styles and abilities and build personalized instruction for each student. And using your tech tools, you can help alleviate the burden on you as the teacher once everything's developed and to go. You're good. All right. So just a quick review. Some of the four most common learning styles are the mastery learner, who processes information in a step-by-step manner, the understanding learner, which learns through a process of questioning, the self-expressive style learner, which learns through images, emotions, and feelings to construct new meaning, and the interpersonal learner, who is very concrete like the mastery style learner, but prefers to learn in social style settings. Now, of course, multiple intelligence does break it down even further and gives you 4 different learning process or ability styles for every learning style I just went over, but we're going to stick with those 4 just for ease of use. So now this next example is all about building choice for learners in web-based lessons, and so you're using your technology to really allow the different styles of learners to show their knowledge in different areas. And this is more kind of English style, since I am an English teacher, and so forgive me for that instead of using science or math-based options, but I think it's easy to adapt based on looking at this specific idea. All right, so a mastery style learner, you might have them write an article or develop a newscast. An interpersonal maybe would write a letter or conduct an interview, possibly even work in a small group setting. An understanding learner might defend a decision, interpret a text, and a self-expressive might write a play and actually perform it, or write a story and deliver that to the class, or maybe develop an advertising campaign using lots of different multimedia positions to present. So I think you really have to, I'm going to repeat this over and over throughout the lesson, you really need to think about the end product, not just in the depth of knowledge components and the lesson planning. I'm going to really kind of give the heave-ho for backwards design, but also in thinking about your end product and end result for the students in the technology realm. What is it that they can use to help them show their knowledge on the topic? So, lesson plan unit development. Like I said, I'm really going to kind of poke and prod towards backwards design. This is going to allow you to know your standard and your end product. So think about the rigor. That's where Bloom's and depth of knowledge is going to come in. And bottom line, think about what technology you can use to help get your students engaged and dive deeper into their understanding of the content. So hopefully that's a good kind of idea of where we're headed, especially even within the next tutorial as far as lesson plan is concerned. So what the heck is Webb's depth of knowledge? If you're like me, this is something maybe new on the scene for you. Let's kind of delve into what it means. Basically, it's the degree of understanding that a student uses on an assessment. So there are different leveled tasks. So a level 1 task is basic recall of information. Level 2 is the use of the information, skills and concepts. Level 3 is going to take it a little bit farther into reasoning, so developing plans and using strategic skills. And then a level 4 is more extended thinking and requires a lot of time. You're going to use some investigation skills and a combination of different learning standards or skills and multiple items over time. So as I was discussing this just recently with my department, we were thinking, for the most part, your unit plans are going to be in the level 2, level 3 category. And you might not get to a level 4, but for a couple of times per year, since it requires quite a bit of time and extended periods and probably extended amounts of units in that regard. So Bloom's versus Webb's. I think for me personally, we've been looking at Bloom's a lot, especially in designing our objectives, whether that's daily or unit objectives, you're using Bloom's a lot. However, when you're looking at the depth of knowledge, it's more than just the verb or the Bloom's verb. You're actually looking at the tasks that you're asking the students to do, and you're identifying, the verb from Bloom's, but then you're moving beyond that into the context of which that verb is being used and the depth of thinking that's actually required. So I've given you this at the bottom of this tutorial. It's a great example of how Bloom's verbs fit into each of these different levels. And it gives you a list of different types of activities so you can kind of break it down for your specific content area. So definitely take a closer look at that later. Webb's depth of knowledge is more about the complexity. So you're thinking again about the end result for the students. Your classroom instruction and even the assessments are going to reflect your learning outcomes and objectives when based on these depth of learning or depth of knowledge levels. So again, at the end, once you're starting to develop these lessons, think about how you are going to use technology to increase the complexity of these tasks for the students. So lesson development. One thing to think about, instead of just always shooting for those really high-level tasks in the class, sometimes when you go that route and you're always aiming for those higher levels, you're going to pass over the heads of some of your learners. So you're going to miss out on some learning opportunities for some. I think it's more important to work through a range as you move through a unit. So you're going to offer a varying range of depth of knowledge activities in larger, more complex tasks. So again, thinking about your end product, your unit objective and standard, and thinking about how you can use technology to help accomplish that task and allow your students more learning opportunities and engagement. So how do you get your students into those higher levels of depth of knowledge? It's important when you're looking at incorporating technology, you think about that end task. Just like the depth of knowledge is asking you to pick the best activity or level for each end result, you're going to, with technology, pick the best tool for your end result. In-class activities can work through a variety of levels and still help move the students along their understanding. Utilize technology to help you move on to those skills. So my example here, currently right now with my students, I'm working on author's point of view and purpose. The end product is going to be that the students are going to show their ability to read a leveled text and determine the author's point of view and purpose and support their reasoning with textual support. Now this is actually a level 3 task. However, along the way, building up to that final assessment, I will have to do some level 1 and level 2 tasks. Like, for example, we're going to have to review fact and opinion. That's going to be vital when they're looking for the author's point of view or the clues to the author's point of view. We're also going to have to look at bias and author's credibility. So I have thought about, okay, I know that these are things I'm going to need to cover. What technology can I use to teach this? I love the app Nearpod. Now in my school, we are a one-to-one iPad school, and I'm a flipped classroom, so I don't actually get to lecture or use Nearpod necessarily in the same way that others might. However, I knew that fact and opinion was going to be review for my kids and could get quite boring. So I decided to build a Nearpod activity to go over and review fact and opinion. And I got quick formative assessment feedback. Okay, my kids totally get this. I can move on. I don't need to spend more time. So that was just a way that I said, okay, the end result is going to be this, and I know that I'm going to need to teach this to get there. How can I use technology to help? So just some simple steps, I think, to help with a virtual environment. Okay, so when you're moving students into level 3 or 4 tasks and you're asking them to start creating things, one of the other things you need to start thinking about is identifying acceptable use and safe environments for the kids. So, acceptable use policies. Does your district have one? Obviously, the whole process or idea of an acceptable use policy is that, we're living in a wide open environment for the kids, and there's tons of helpful educational resources. But some of the documents, images, and files you might come across while online are not necessarily suitable for the kids. So to help deal with these concerns, a lot of districts are starting to put together acceptable use policies for teachers, staff, and students. They basically are there to describe the school system and how they deem acceptable use of technology for educational purposes. They're supposed to be there to help protect you for liability incurred by allowing students and teachers to access different variety of information on the internet. So you need to make sure that you know what is on your acceptable use policy for your district. What can you use and do in your classroom according to this policy? On the same token, have the students been well aware of their student use acceptable use policy, and have they been introduced to your policies on digital citizenship and what it means to have a digital footprint? We talked about this in the previous tutorial, so I'm not going to go in depth on it right now, but it is something to think about when you're looking at these particular resources and building an environment for your kids utilizing technology. Also, if your students are going to be using technology to create content, you're moving them into those higher level tasks. Do they need to be introduced to Creative Commons and the idea for proper citation techniques? It's really valuable for you to teach this to your kids so that they know the importance of citing where they're getting their information and their sources. So, Creative Commons. If your students are using images, music, or videos in their final products, their end results, it's really important to introduce them to Creative Commons and the idea of citing. So I would really suggest that you poke around a little on creativecommons.org and see what teacher resources and student resources are available, especially considering your content and your population of students. Also, some great places to go to sources, to go and get sources for digital citizenship. YouTube has some great playlists already curated and made for you. Sophia has a ton of tutorials on digital citizenship and Creative Commons and citation created at different levels and for different content. So you just have to search for those sources. And then, of course, another great resource is Common Sense Media. I've gone ahead and given you a few resources at the bottom of this tutorial, but please feel free to also just poke around on Sophia and creativecommons.org. Now, when it comes to evaluating websites and resources, it's important to think about some things to evaluate the quality of the source. Think about the author or the sponsoring organization. Think about the objectivity and bias. That's always important for us as teachers. And also think about the accuracy and whether it's a current topic. I know back in the day, web quests were huge. That was one of the ways that teachers were trying to integrate technology for their students. And while you can still find a lot of those web quests out there, are they necessarily current? When you think about engaging activities for the kids, whether it's current is a big motivator and factor for the kids. So these are 3 things that I think could be really helpful when you're evaluating the quality. So in the end, think about what the end goal is going to be for the students, what access you need. This could be lots of different things. When we're talking about the acceptable use policy, of course, what are you going to be allowed to do? Some schools allow YouTube, some schools don't. So are you going to need to find videos on SchoolTube or Vimeo instead of YouTube? All of those things come to play when you're starting to design lessons. But it also comes down to what actual tool can you use? Is something going to be used better on a desktop or a laptop versus a tablet? If you're looking at, the fact, like for me, all of our kids have iPads. Some of my teachers have been finding or wanting to use different Flash-based web programs that don't function on iPads. So I've had a lot of frantic calls right before students are coming in for first period saying, I can't use this website. It's not working on my teacher iPad. Well, it's because it's a Flash-based program. It's not going to work. So you do need to think about what access on all the different levels you are going to need. And then finally, are other teachers using this source? I cannot say enough for the idea of expanding your professional learning network. Get online, join networks, use social media to your advantage. Twitter, Pinterest, Google+ communities are some of my favorite places to get resources and see what other teachers are using. So get online and see what other teachers are curating and putting together so that you don't have to. There's so much stuff already put out to help you in this process. All right. That's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned a lot about building a safe and effective virtual environment for your students. And I'll see you on the next one.